So I'd like to call to the stage, first off, Ada Guan, CEO and Board Director of Rich Data Co. Come on up. Thank you. David G, Board Advisor, Author, CIO and CISO. Megan Motto, CEO of Governance Institute of Australia. And of course, the panel moderator for today, our very own Chief Growth Officer, Shamane Tan.
Hey everyone, this is a fun part. All right, welcome to Game On, Business Trivia Arena. And we have an amazing panel here in the hot seats. It's really hot. And in this session, we're going to involve all of you, all right? So you have an opportunity to play along with us. It's going to be good. All right, we'll start first. We just dive right into it, okay? We have prepared a bunch of trivia for you. So let's have a look at it, all right? Oh, what happened? The answer. Oh, well, okay. Just let's pretend you didn't see that. Okay, so the first one, a global survey of 1,000 CEOs from really large organizations, they found that a minority of the leaders are really concerned about their ability to effectively mitigate the damages caused by cyber attacks. Now, I have a feeling all of you will get this answer right. So, true or false? True? False? False? What? Oh, wow, okay, perfect score this time round. False? Okay, now we're going to find out why. Okay? Why is that so? What do you think are the statistics actually? I'm going to start first with David G. Congratulations, by the way, on your retirement from Macquarie Bank. And you've been jet setting around the world. He just published his first book, The Aspiring CIO and CISO. I think all of you have seen it. It was very prolific on the LinkedIn. So, David has also brought a few copies of his books with him later on that he'll be giving out, so you can look for him. Very limited copies. So from your experience that you've shared in the book, right, David, what are the biggest challenges that you have seen in implementing robust cybersecurity measures in organizations?
Tough question. Look, to start off with, strategy is all about making choices. And when you walk into a role as a CISO or as a CIO, you actually get a whole bunch of people giving you choices and saying you should be doing this, you should be doing that. So actually, to actually then figure out what's really important, okay? Because there's a regulator telling you this, there's stakeholders telling you something else, and then to actually do you have the data to do quantifications to figure out where do I get my biggest rocks to reduce? It's really hard. So it needs to be really measured and try to, for yourself, make your decisions around what's going to make a difference and get the risk buy down, and then try to convince management and the board that these are the biggest things that I'm going to focus on, and therefore I want to have less focus on these things. But that's okay, because and that's hard.
That's a good point, David. Maybe we'll go to Megan then. Because Megan, you're constantly speaking at major events. You're seen as a thought leader by many board directors. That's your world. It'd be good to see what are your observations, maybe from like the smaller businesses, what are you seeing?
Yeah, and look, I might say we do speak to boards of directors, but the Governance Institute is the professional body for people who work in governance, and that's not just the board of directors. Governance is all about the frameworks for decision making, and decisions are taken at all levels in organisations. So we like to talk about governance from the boardroom to the staff room and recognise that all of you are governance professionals because you're all making those hard decisions and the trade-offs. And it's around the framework with which you do that. So risk management framework, prioritisation framework, etc. So that's the first point to make. The second point to make is that it's not much use talking about boards of directors because 96% of Australia's economy is run by small businesses, most of whom have no directors other than the founder. So those those decisions are taken by the founder and probably a few executives as they grow and scale that they surround themselves with. But the same principles apply.
Yes.
And that is the conversation around, the first is focus and attention on the issue. We did a survey a couple of years ago and we found that 2/3 of organisations surveyed felt that there was not enough attention being placed on cyber in the boardroom. So at those decision-making tables, we still need to have a much clearer focus on cyber. Probably the stats are shifting a little bit more these days, particularly with the new privacy legislation coming through and the responsibility on organisations to be protecting data. The second thing that decision makers, and I'll say decision makers rather than directors for that purpose, is that it all starts with data governance. Understanding data governance, what are your crown jewels? We were talking earlier. What's personal sensitive information? What needs to be protected? In what way? What do you have? Where is it stored? What are your protocols? What's your retention policies? So having good data governance practices is really at the foundational level, and that should be seen not just for the purposes of cyber, but because also there's both a risk and opportunity with great data governance.
Yeah.
I've been speaking a lot on AI these days, and of course that all starts with data governance as well, because rubbish in, rubbish out, you can't really provide great AI, closed AI systems if you don't have good grasp on how you manage your data. So data management is absolutely critical. And I think the third, there's lots of things, I won't go into integrated risk management, but I think the third piece is really around capacity building.
Yeah.
We see far too many in the boardroom, for example, directors who are simply not up to speed with what they need to know in the digital era. So that digital literacy piece is absolutely critical in the boardroom, but also the questions that need to be asked around that capacity throughout the organisation and the culture that's being created for risk, because we all know that a huge element of cyber is actually your personnel risk, either through internal actors or just through mistakes and poor behaviours, poor hygiene behaviours. So the board should be focused on getting data governance right first and foremost, thinking about purpose and prioritisation, and thirdly about capacity for themselves, for their staff, for their workforces, for their supply chains, and also culture.
That's really good, Megan. And we will touch on a few of the topics later on as well. Before I go to Ada, actually, next is your area of specialization. The next trivial statement, okay? There we go. About data. The global big data analytics market was valued at $240 billion in 2021, expected to reach $349.56 billion in 2024, and further projected to reach $655.3 billion in 2029. Now, that's massive, right? True or false? Everyone, have a guess. Oh, okay. True? False? All right, it's a bit of a mixed thing in the audience, so let's see what's the answer. True. That's a staggering amount. Lucky guess. I think, Ada, you got it right? That's all right. You have been amazing in terms of the work that you've been doing in your field. Honestly, we have a lot to be proud of, Ada, because congratulations on your recent spotlight as well in the Australian 2024 Innovators list. Rich Dataco is phenomenal in terms of the progress and the achievement, and they're making Australia really proud. So that's an incredible recognition. Can you talk through some of the benefits that RDC has been seen, in terms of driving innovation with data?
Thank you. So I think previous speaker talked through purpose. So I think that is quite important and for any company to have a purpose. So RDC purpose is around driving financial inclusion. So how we're thinking about it, so we provide AI decisioning capability for business lending and commercial lending. So if we look at from the business perspective or SME perspective, and thank you. And in Australia, so if you look at some of the research done by Judo Bank, we have $94 billion funding gap between what the banks are providing and what SME needed. So you can imagine how that impacting, I think, employment, economic growth, and all that. So if you look at banking system, banks actually, David can talk through this, bank actually wanted to lend and needed to lend and in order to make money. So the question is really, why there's such a funding gap when SME really needs the funding and the banks wanted to lend and they can't really lend. So the answer is really sitting in the data. The method I think the banks currently using are accessing the risk, credit risk for the SMEs are founded or invented in 1950s. So the question we really ask is, with so many data now become available, and with the advancement of AI, can we look at the credit risk differently? Can we use AI on behavior data and in order to understand the SME risk and to help banks to lend more to the good borrowers who actually currently banks don't have sufficient information on. So in that sense, data really can change the game, and AI can really change the game in terms of how SME can get access to credit.
Very good, Ada. Thank you for sharing that. We'll come back to you more as well in a bit. I will quickly move on to the next trivia statement. Okay. So, according to this survey by NAICD, having oversight for cybersecurity is ranked number 2 as very important in terms of the important areas for boards to focus on over the next 12 months. So have a guess. Do you think that's accurate? True, false? Oh, false. Okay. You guys are pretty good. I think you'll pass the exam. There you go. So interestingly, it's actually ranked 4th. Okay, out of more than 500 over directors were interviewed, and the top 3 are on strategy execution, strategy development, and risk management. Then the 4th one is on cybersecurity. So back to you, David. Okay, speaking of strategy development, can you share what makes an effective cybersecurity strategy? What would be the top 3 focal areas when you're presenting to the board?
Well, there's no universal answer in terms of top 3. Firstly, the board needs to know and understand their responsibilities, and that's really important. The board needs to understand, from a risk appetite standpoint, what's the posture and what needs to be done. So if there's a out of appetite situation, what's the path to green to get us to there? Is it 1 year, 5 years, 3 years?
Yes.
That kind of thing. So I think that's all fundamental, and I think on the basis of that, there will be some reds, naturally. And so how do you have a path to amber? Amber's pretty good, light yellow's good. How do we move towards amber? And that's going to take time and investment. So how do you have the board support the reds and challenge the greens? And that's hard, because typically speaking, boards will see reds and go, "Oh, I'm uncomfortable with this." And I think about, in my perspective, being an ex-CIO, ex-CISO, and my last role with risk management at Macquarie, I'm now thinking, as I move and transition to the boards, I get to ask, as a board member, 1 or 2 questions or 3 questions to a CISO, and on the basis of that, satisfy my responsibilities. It's not much. So I can kind of understand why they're nervous about the cybersecurity, because they don't get much time and details around what's going on versus, as an advisor, I can go and ask really hard questions around
That's true.
the controls and the state of controls and why that's okay. And so I think if you can just focus on, the boards can focus in on the most key things, and then therefore how do I support that from an investment standpoint? Because every CISO does not have enough money. That's for clear. There's not enough money. Even if there is a doubling of the budget, the resources can't support that in the business or in your own team. So it's about getting the most important things focused on, and that's hard because everyone wants to boil the ocean. And how do you then say these controls are the most critical? And I've seen organisations where they've had large numbers of critical controls. They said 50% or 60%. No. How do we go down to 10%? What are the top 10 things we need to work on?
Yeah, that's really, really good. Before I go to you, Megan, Ada, actually, from your experience then working with boards, do you agree with the way this has been ranked? And what topics or concerns do you find that they're usually most concerned with? And why?
Let me add one here, perhaps, and which are coming up more and more, I think, in the board discussions. I was in probably the NCR Board of Directors Forum probably 2 or 3 years ago. So one of the topics is actually around AI. So you're thinking about the industry, where the industry is moving, and we're moving to an era of being AI native in every part of our life. So if you look at around the directors, I think directors is still trying to catch up on the information security and be digitally aware and making AI-related decisions, and because AI become a core competency for many organizations, and how do we equip the board and with that type of skills and experience in order to ask good questions is a very interesting topic.
Yeah, that's good. Do you want to share a bit about your approach?
I think it's mainly from AI perspective. It's a mean to an end, right? So I think concentrating on what's the problem you're trying to solve, and providing the right AI education, and it's just a tool. And so without understanding the exact details around AI and having the right framework, principles, and back to Megan's point around the framework and the principles are super important. And what do you need to know in order to govern?
Yeah, and it's also, taking that journey with them as well. So that's really good, Ada. Thank you for sharing that. Megan, earlier you talked about prioritization. So can you shed some light on how some of the boards approach the process of prioritization overall? And from their perspective, what are the most critical factors they should consider when evaluating the organization's cybersecurity strategy?
Look, and I might just, before I answer that question, just go back for a moment to the capacity building piece, and it really does play a part here. I think it's really underestimated how much work there is to be done for directors and business owners, business leaders to be upskilling in this area. So most of so we do a diversity survey where we look at a range of different diversity criteria, and one of them, of course, is age. And we know that the directors of major companies are pushing 60 and above, and they are not digital natives, and they are very sophisticated, sometimes ego-driven. Don't tell anyone. People that don't want to admit that they don't know what they don't know. And so the real skill here for cyber professionals is to speak the language for the audience that they're speaking to, rather than in their own language. There is a huge amount of discernible knowledge in this sector, jargon, acronyms, and directors just aren't there yet. There was a very famous case called the Sekuro case in the early 2000s that sent shockwaves through the director community. And it was a case where there was a misreading of liabilities on a balance sheet of current versus non-current liabilities. And the decision taken by ASIC was to fine and imprison directors because it was the responsibility of every director, if they had an accounting background or not, to understand the financial statements. And I am waiting for the Sekuro case of our generation, which is the liability that will be imposed on directors, to know more than just to know what the top 10 questions to ask. Because I can read a guide and say, what are the top 10 questions? The role of director fiduciary responsibility is to interrogate the answers and assure themselves. And that is a layer quite a bit below just knowing the top 10 questions to ask so that you sound like you know what you're talking about in the boardroom. So there's just a huge upskilling task, and I implore cyber professionals to really think about how they can do that education task and assist their boards in a really safe way. And I say safe in terms of psychological safety. Directors do not want to admit that they don't know what they don't know in front of other directors. You'll have seen this before many, many times. And so thinking about how you can equip them, through additional information, cheat sheets in resources centres, taking them one-on-one rather than in a group through things, and speaking the language of governance rather than speaking the language of cyber. We did a project with Data 61 about 5 years ago now, where we took one of the big challenges of getting cyber professionals into the boardroom, and we need more cyber and digital professionals in the boardroom. But you can't rock up and say, well, you need me because I'm a technologist and we know that you need more technology skills in the boardroom. It's just as incumbent upon you to learn the world of governance, and so that is to learn the world of risk management and law and finance and all of those other elements, HR, people systems, to equip yourselves to be board ready as a technology professional, as it is to educate boards the other way around. So did you want to jump in on that before I actually answer the question?
For a second, if I could. about the age bit. I am 65, but I'm not offended. Okay. However, I think when I told my boss in February last year, going to retire the following year in July, I started a sort of a discovery phase of thinking about what I'm going to do next, and I started interviewing and talking to board members who actually kind of liked me and said, okay, what's out there that I'm competing with, so to speak, for board positions? And it was quite interesting and striking to me that I'd find many CIO type or project delivery type technology leaders in board positions, but there was no one that had a sort of a cyber risk background. And I still haven't found one yet. I found a very limited, small slice of people with tech, but they understand tech, not cyber necessarily, which is interesting.
Yeah. I think, back to you, Megan, you wanted to jump.
All right, so you just talked to me about what boards should be thinking about in terms of prioritisation. So I'll start with the regulatory and compliance risk, and that's, what is ASIC? ASIC is now looking at cyber washing, they're looking at AI washing, and they're really seriously looking at the responsibility and liability of boards to not only be across the space, but be able to be making the right decisions to implement them reasonably in their organisations. So that's the first piece. The second, of course, is reputational risk, and those sort of non-financial risks, which can very, very quickly and do quickly turn into financial risks. So thinking about all of those elements. And of course, a resourcing problem, thinking about how to prioritise a resource, looking through a risk management lens for prioritisation, because you're absolutely right. This piece is how long is a piece of string? And so there really are some tough decisions that need to be made, and that's where boards should be focusing their attention. Once again, we have to break it down and simplify it. It's no use us sitting here talking about the ASX listed 100 boards, the world that you come from, because that is a very, very small population of the business community. There's 7 million businesses in Australia, only 100 of them are 100 top listed ASX companies. So thinking about how to break it down into really simple systems, have integrated risk management frameworks, which are cross-referencing cyber across other areas like compliance risk, like HR risk, like legal risk, for example, but also focusing the board's attention not on a very long list on a risk register, but saying to them, focus on 3 things. Yeah. First and foremost, focus on the risk appetite and what is sitting outside of your risk appetite and why, and understand the controls and the measures. The second is where risks are changing from one meeting to the next. So in the last quarter, has a material risk appeared, has a risk deteriorated? So understanding the changing nature of risks, and particularly in this space because change happens fast. And the third thing, of course, is then looking at those reds. You're always actually going to have high consequences for some breaches in the cyberspace, albeit that you might get your likelihood down to low, but the consequences can be significant. So you're always going to have those risks that are in that high category, sometimes the extreme category, which for a small business, you just don't have the resources to get down any lower than that. But to understand that, be aware of it, and have mitigating strategies in place for what happens when the breach occurs, because it will. And so really understanding what are the mitigation and recovery strategies for after it occurs.
Yeah, that are relevant to the individual businesses. I think this is really helpful as well, because not everyone actually gets to enter the boardroom. I think just a quick show of hands, how many of you actually present to the boardroom? A couple, probably the CISOs and the CIOs, but the rest of you who might not, you'll be supporting the CIOs and CISOs who will be in the boardroom, and it's really helpful to understand that when you're preparing materials to share with the CISOs and the CISOs if they are in the boardroom, what does that world look like? How do they prioritize? And that's a language that we need to know, how we can align so that we actually resonate with them, right? So I think that's really powerful. We're going to go now to the next bit. I'm going to go to Ada. So that's her area. Well, 3 out of 5 Australians believe that AI will help to develop new lines of business in the next 3 years. Agree, disagree, true or false? Oh, true. Okay, let's see if that's correct. Oh, it's false. I was wrong myself and I prepared this. Okay, let's see why. Okay, the answer is because it's actually 4 out of 5. So there are many more Australians who believe that AI will help to bring to develop new lines of business in the next 3 years. And Ada, we have seen more people embracing this than we have thought. And you're already living in the future with like RDC's specialization in AI-driven decisioning platforms. So can you elaborate how AI has not only shaped your solutions but influenced the culture? I think the overall culture and approach to business.
So a couple of things, right? So one is AI is a very overused term in the industry. So probably the most overused term, and besides cyber in the industry. And when the Uber driver has a strong view what AI is and isn't, it's a term overused. And so from RDC perspective, we started really be more precise, start using machine learning within AI back in 2016. So AI really have multiple branches, right? So, and I think I have one investor ask me once, so are you a real AI company? And the reason for that is every investor started to think only generative AI is AI, nothing else is AI. That's completely not true. And generative AI is one part of AI and not all AI. So AI contains, I can speak from RDC perspective, we use 3 branches of AI. We do use Gen AI and as part of our product suite. And in the R&D stage, we're currently looking at prototyping with banks, which we're quite excited about. But the base of our platform is around machine learning, is around knowledge management. And the reason for that, I think AI is like any tools, and it really depends on what problem you're trying to solve. In the business lending and the commercial lending space, what we're really facing is what we call a small data issue versus big data issue. There's just not enough data sets to access the risk of a business. So in that sense, the machine learning is important, and but it's not sufficient by itself. We added knowledge management around how to capture bankers and risk experts' knowledge in order to help to do a better assessment of the risk for the business. So that type of things really depends on what's the problem to solve, and AI is a mean to an end. And I think the risk I'm seeing in the industry is this. I was in breakfast, I think, with a whole bunch of founders and who are in the technology domain. I think there were about 20 founders in that breakfast. I'm the only founder not calling my company a Gen AI company. So I think we'll see AI overused and Gen AI overused, and in the industry, I would say.
Yeah, that's a good outlook of the current market. All right, we have our final question, and we're going to do this like a rapid fire question. So nearly 90% of the organization experienced a breach in the last year, and they would attribute it to the lack of cyber skills. I think we talked about competency earlier. 70% attribute it to the increased cyber risk to the skill gap, right? So would you agree that that's a big part of why people think breaches occur? True or false? Any guesses? I see people shaking their head. False? False? Oh. Well, I'll just throw a random one here. And let's see what is the finding. Oh, it's true. So yeah. Surprised myself. 90% of the organizations that experience, they all attribute it to the lack of cyber skills. So that's interesting. That's more about their perception, right? So very curious to hear what's the panel take to this. Because as great leaders, we're always thinking ahead. So maybe we'll go back to you, David. How can we enhance the competency of our staff and boards?
Well, it's a hard one. I think I wrote an article in June as I was retiring for CIO magazine about this, the 3.45 million shortage globally. And so the data's real. I mean, the people are under-resourced and jobs are vacant. That's the fact, right? Teaching people cyber or teaching people data is tricky. And I think there's a crossover here between this topic and then the AI data side, where we can say, okay, how do we get the bots to help us? And can the bots help us be more accurate? Yes, they can. I think the problem we have from an ethical standpoint is that there will come a point where actually we had this idea of co-pilot, which I wrote an article. I was in Vegas last week, and I wrote an article in Vegas about this co-pilot idea, which is, I think, a complete fallacy, right? We feel comfortable that we're kind of co-piloting, but actually we have no human way in hell actually checking what this AI model is doing, because they're going so fast, They have no holidays, they have no sick days, right? They keep working. So we're getting lured into this sense where actually we're going to be relying more and more to say, our SOC's going to be these bots running around checking things, which is fantastic. But how do we know it's right? So I think the reality is we're going to go down that path because that's the right way to go. But I worry a bit about the ethics around how do you know? How do we know it's okay? How do we validate what's really going on?
Very good points. We're going to quickly go to Ada. If you can just add a final comment.
I think it's in terms of the culture perspective and the continued learning and continue building the capability and capacity perhaps is the way to go. And specific around AI, I think we're looking, when we're hiring new developers, we're looking for people who can actually leverage AI and to do coding. And it's become one of the skills we're looking for.
Megan, final words. 2 sentences.
2 sentences. Well, I'm going to give you 3, so I'm going to, because I have 3 points. The first is culture, and culture's driven from the top. So it's got to be led from the leadership team, from the board of directors, if you have one. You know, I've got to be doing my cyber training and talking about it like everybody else. So it's got to be led from the top, and that's all about culture. Second is carrots and sticks. You have to have the right systems in place to have the right, both compliance systems, and that's the sticks, but also the reward systems. How are you rewarding? How are you hiring? And the third piece I'm going to actually take from Noel's opening keynote address, and that is you've got to make it fun, gamification. So you're not going to force anyone into anything that they don't want to do, and they're going to only take half of it out if they were forced into it in the first place. So we've got to make it fun. We've got to gamify.
I love that. What a way to end this panel session. Thank you, Megan, David, and Ada. A big round of applause. It was jam-packed with a lot of good extracts. And we've got little gifts for you, a mini-me Lego that's tailored to look exactly like you. So you can pick one up as you head off the stage. And we're on to a short break soon. I'll pass it quickly to Alicia.